this world. We're not of this world. We have to leave this world. And so Christ above culture. Sometimes Christ is the transformer of culture, that we need to enter into culture and change it from within and make it more like Christ. And sometimes Christians have operated as, and Christ has been within culture, Christ of culture, that the culture and Christianity are so united and so closely together that they work harmoniously hand in hand together. And so probably the truth is, if I was to give you my commentary on Niebuhr's categories here, what I would tell you is probably there are times when we need to do all of these, right? It's not as easy as just picking one of them. There are times where we need to be opposed to what culture stands for, but there might be times where we can work hand in hand with culture and say, you know what, we're not too far off, and we can figure out how to do this together. And so there's probably room for all of these in different areas and different topics. But what I want to present to you tonight is, I think, as we engage in political conversations, I think the second option is an interesting one for us to consider in our world today. What I would label this is Christians trying to live counterculturally. We need to live counterculturally, offer people another option than what they're seeing from within our own culture today. We discussed a couple times over the last few weeks how anger and fear are dominant emotions when it comes to politics these days. It seems like the more we engage, the angrier we get, and the more we engage, the more fear we consume, and sometimes begins to consume us as well. But as followers of Jesus who want to witness to who Christ is in our life, we want to offer a countercultural witness, a countercultural option for the people around us. I don't believe that Jesus wants us to be angry or afraid of the issues that we face today on our political landscape. There may be a time and a place for anger and even for fear, appropriate fear, to take place. So anger towards injustice and evil in the world, yes. Anger towards political parties or politicians or neighbors or friends who have different views than you, I'm going to say no on that one. There may be a time and a place for fear of God and an appropriate fear of and the awe of what God has created and entrusted to us. I think that's probably appropriate for us to have that type of fear. But fear of enemies and fear of end of the world kinds of scenarios that are handed to us by others, I'm going to vote no on that one. It's really interesting. I feel like over the last couple of weeks, I've either seen articles or heard people talking about how no matter who you're planning to vote for the presidency, either option, it seems, is being presented as the end of the world. Has anybody else run across this same dilemma? That if you vote on this side, it's going to be the end of the country as we know it. And also, the other side is saying if you vote on this side, it's going to be the end of the country as we know it. And I don't think that that's probably the case for the most part. It may be different, it may look different, but I'm hopeful at least that there is a different option for us to present to the world for who we want to be. Okay, so let me give you a really long and complicated. This is really the class that I'm presenting tonight. Here it is in one sentence, hopefully, for us tonight. Mark, would you put that up? We can and should be a non-anxious, peaceful, holy, calming, others-oriented, and loving presence in our world. And I think that's the countercultural witness that we want to have during this political season. So imagine a scenario, imagine an issue, imagine a particular article or a news, something from the news that's being presented. How can we filter whatever that is through this lens and offer this as our witness to the world about that particular issue, about that particular article or that news report? How can we engage the world this way, counterculturally, to help them, to help ourselves understand what Christ has done for us? If our witness is ultimately about Jesus and who he is, how can we live this way to offer our society, our culture, a different option than what they're receiving from news media, from popular people that we can listen to from all of these different sources. Okay, so what I've done here, and the reason I ordered it this way is because I was trying to make it memorable so that you could remember what these are. So Mark, if you'll go to the next one. Here's my words. And what they spell out, if you just take the first letter, y'all are gonna love this. Y'all are gonna be like, wow. NAFCOOL. We should be NAFCOOL. Non-anxious, peaceful, holy, calming, others-oriented, and loving. So if you just take the first letter of all of those, that's how I'm going to help you remember this tonight, is we're going to be NAFCOOL. I wanted it to be NAPCOOL, but I had holy in there, and so I couldn't make NAPCOOL work. It had to be NAFCOOL. But we should be non-anxious. Anxiety and other mental health issues are plaguing our society right now. And so when we walk into a room, when we engage somebody in a conversation about politics, how can we bring the anxiety level of the room down? If we are entering a room and the anxiety level is going up, I don't think we're doing a very good job of witnessing to who Jesus is in that room. So we need to help bring the anxiety level down so that we can witness to the truth of who Jesus is in a culture that is angry and fearful. We need to be peaceful. Rather than moving towards violence, anger, or hatred of the other, we need to help people and ourselves find peace and make peace in the midst of a culture that I think wants to incite us to anger. And so how can we witness to who Jesus is by bringing peace? We need to be holy. I think that's one of the areas that we often leave out in today's discussions about Christianity. If we're going to be non-anxious and peaceful and loving, there's no room for holiness. We got to be holy still. I think that's really important. We need to be set apart by God, not just to live good lives. The gospel says that we can never live a good enough life. So holy, not just to be good, but to help others understand what God has to offer for them and how they can be set apart as well. We need to be calming. I love this metaphor. We need to be a thermostat, not a thermometer, right? So you want to be able to control, not just say what the temperature is. You want to say, okay, we need to be calming, so we're going to turn the temperature down so it's not so hot. We need to be others-oriented. What I mean by others-oriented, Scripture talks a lot about placing the needs and desires of others above your own. And so how can we be others-oriented, where I'm looking to the needs of others, where I'm putting others before myself, so that I can pay attention not just to my own selfish wants and desires, but to others in service to them. And then also we need to be loving. Holiness is oftentimes presented as the opposite of loving in Christian circles. If you're going to be holy and do the right thing, you need to tell others that they're not doing the right thing and get on to them for it. But that's not the case. We need to be holy and loving, showing others the love of Christ and the opportunity for forgiveness in their life. Okay, so NAFCOOL. Are we going to remember NAFCOOL? NAPHCOOL, NAFCOOL. Pretty cool, right? Anyways, I want to share with you a couple things that Josh shares in his book that I hope will be helpful, and then ask you to comment on, I guess, less what he has to say and more how can we use this to our advantage in these last days before the election. So the first one is kind of a hard one, but he presents a couple of different ideas in his book as examples of how we can live a witness to Jesus that will be countercultural, that maybe will help us do some of these things. And so I want to present these to you tonight as ways that we might discuss together how can we put this into practice in these final days before the election, and also leading up to beyond the election as well. So the first one, it can be hard. But Josh recommends that we make a commitment to resist allowing any media outlet to become the primary way that we think about culture and the world. The reason he says this is because it can be so easy to do a 15-minute devotional in the morning, read our Bible, spend some time in prayer, and then to consume hours upon hours of articles and news reports and things like that. And if we're spending 15 minutes being formed by Jesus and 4 hours being formed by whichever news outlet or reporter, or Jesus is going to get outweighed in that arrangement. And so his goal is for us to allow Scripture and for Christ to be the primary source of what we believe about the world, what we believe about others, what we believe about ourselves. Okay, so let me read this quote to you. He says, "Most news outlets work hard to generate allegiances and alliances, and one of the most effective ways to do this is to play by the rules of a binary system. It has proven to work. When we give into this kind of system, it makes unity, fellowship, and even evangelism extremely difficult. Our hearts were not created by God to take in large doses of media every day. As Christians, we need to practice no's, resistance, and restraint when it comes to how we engage content about current events. Remember, we must learn to engage culture, but as we do, we must do this as people who are passionate and intentional about protecting our hearts from any narrative that attempts to harden them." So when I run across those conflicting news reports that says if you elect this person or if you elect this person, the country as we know it is about to end because of, and they list off the reasons, and what Josh is promoting is, hey, don't let either of those two sources be the primary thing developing the way that you think about the world and our culture. Let Christ be the one to do that, and filter anything like that through the lens of Christ before anything else, so that you can then hopefully have a healthier, happier, more spirit-filled view of our culture and our society. Okay, so respond to that, somebody. How do we, is this helpful? How do we do this? What are our comments?
We talk about why Dad do this, did he get engaged the right week? I mean, they got to come up with things to talk about. And the same thing's true about politics. You got to stir up people, you got to make up topics, whatever. There's only a certain amount of news that I was raised to do, and be short on 4 minutes, but 45 minutes is probably good.
Yeah.
Well, we probably like to do it in 20.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not really news, it's more of opinions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Okay. Good. Yeah. Yeah. So even having almost a time limit to say, hey, I'm going to stay current. I'm going to stay up to date, but I'm almost going to set a time limit for myself and say, roughly, this is how much I want to consume. Find your trusted sources. Find the people that you believe are trustworthy and helpful. But say, okay. Or outrageous, right? Like they've gotten pretty good at getting like 8 words to make you angry, or 8 words to make you go down a rabbit trail that you look up and all of a sudden you spent 30 minutes following all these different, links and all that kind of stuff. So yes, headlines can probably be helpful, but there might be a cautionary note to pay attention. Sometimes those are intended for different purposes than actually information. Right? Okay, good. Yeah. So Josh tells this story in his book that I found a little bit funny. Hopefully you do too. But he told a story about a guy who spent as much as he could every day trying to find out information. It was an honest search. It was an honest, I want to know the issues, I want to know the policies, I want to know the candidates, and I want to know what they think about this. But he would watch as much as he could every day, and every day he would find himself more stressed, depressed, and angry, in a rage, is the way that he described it. But he made the bold choice to do what Denver's described for us tonight, to limit his intake. And he found that when he limited his intake, it was much easier for him to reach for peace and joy. And he also commented that his wife felt the same way about him. Right? Like, if you spend all this time trying to consume and understand, I think a lot of what is set up for us to do right now is to get angry, to get depressed, to not have hope because, hey, if it goes this way, it's going to be terrible. If it goes that way, it's going to be terrible. And as Christians, we want to have a different witness. We have hope. We don't want to be depressed because we have hope. And so we want that to be the primary lens that we view things through. And hopefully our spouses and friends and people that are close to us will recognize that in us as well. Okay. Find a trusted source. Find the people that you believe are putting good things out there. But while you do that, remember that the truth is Jesus. So they're trustworthy, I hope, but we have an ultimate person who is trustworthy in Christ. Okay, second idea from Josh, and it kind of goes back to our NAFCOOL, but Josh talks about peacemaking, and he devotes an entire chapter to the idea of peacemaking in our political climate. And so he says that peacemaking is the commitment to work toward a better future, and peacemaking is meant to turn an opponent into a companion. And then he quotes a handful of scriptures for us to consider how the New Testament writes about making peace and living at peace. So Romans chapter 14, verse 19, he says, "Therefore, let us make every effort to do what leads to peace and to mutual edification." John chapter 14, verse 27, Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives, so do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid." Colossians chapter 3, verse 15, Paul writes, "Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, since as members of one body you were called to peace, and be thankful." James writes in chapter 3, verse 18, "Peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness." Colossians 1, 19 and 20, "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him," talking about Jesus, "and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross." So in our context, as we're approaching election day, I think the rhetoric is probably going to continue to get amplified. In fact, I think even just on, was it yesterday and today, we saw examples from both parties of pretty significant hatred of groups or names being called of certain groups of people. And so I think this is a really hard thing for us to do in this world because our example, again, that we're trying to be countercultural to, we keep seeing examples of how people want to define this group of people and they call them whatever they call them. Or they want to belittle this group of people over here, and so they say those kinds of things, or those things just kind of accidentally come out, or whatever the case is, right? But we keep seeing examples of this divisive kind of rhetoric, but Scripture says that we need to be people of peace, that we have to make peace, which means that we have to work at it, which means it's not just automatic. It doesn't come naturally to us, and so we've got to actually put some work into doing this. I love the way that James says it. We have to sow it in order to reap it. Right? And so we can't just expect it. We have to work at it. We have to put the work in, put the time in order to do this. And so when Jesus is asked by his disciples how often they should forgive someone who has wronged them, do you remember what Jesus says to that? He gives them a math equation. I've never been any good at math. But essentially the idea is forgive them more times than you can count. Right? And so this is the kind of countercultural witness that Jesus wants us to have in the world today, is rather than looking for enemies and picking fights, how can we learn to forgive and create community and create opportunities for companionship and friendship and conversation to take place, rather than looking for opportunities to demonize one another. We have to work for peace. And so in these final days leading up to the election, if you have an opportunity to help the temperature come down in those conversations and to find ways to make peace, I think that's a very scriptural idea. Okay, comments. how are you going to do this? How should I do this? How should we do this? What do you think about this idea of peacemaking that Josh puts before us? Is it possible?
Said forgiveness just on the tip of the tongue. Live with forgiveness, it'll be a lot more peace.
Yeah.
I think I've learned that with Rick, it just works. I mean, I don't know how if you just forgive somebody automatic, you're going to live more peaceful.
Yeah, yeah. I imagine in the next couple of days, I have friends on both sides, right, who tend towards this side or tend towards that side. I imagine I'm going to hear from one of those groups in the next week or so, I can't believe such and such happened. Well, that's my opportunity to make peace in that situation, to try to say, you know what? Let's go for a different filter. Let's go for a different lens to see this through. And so I want to present that to my friends that are, whichever side they're on are going to be disappointed. How can I make peace in that scenario? How can I help encourage them towards a life of peace where they don't think that everything is going to be destroyed and ruined because the person that they voted for didn't come to office? Is that making sense to us? Again, I'm not being very helpful on issues or who to vote for, but how you go about this conversation that you might have with friends or relatives or neighbors or anybody, that's what I care more about. I care about us having being good representatives of Christ in all this. Yeah, Denver.
Especially when we're upset, angry at you because you got that backwards. I wouldn't have my lunch as a teacher because if I had problems with the parent, it was because we weren't finishing in that order. And so instead, we're quick to get mad, we're quick to talk.
Okay, third idea, before we run out of too much time here, that Josh presents in his book is the idea of service. If we are going to witness to the world around us, the world is not real keen on feeling like they're having a finger wagged at them in their face. But what does seem to connect and work with people is true connection and relationship. And when we are willing to serve others and willing to do what Christ gave us an example of and to take a position as, you know what, I would love to hear what you have to say about this. I would love to understand your perspective on this and take that role of I care more about you than I do about myself. That seems to still connect in our world. Back in the 4th century, that's a long time ago, 300s, Constantine became the emperor of the Roman Empire. And if you've heard the name Constantine before, you probably know that he nationalized the Christian religion in Rome. And so when Constantine passed, his son succeeded him, and his son was succeeded after his death by his cousin, who in history is known as Julian the Apostate. So Julian the Apostate is known as that because he turned away from Christianity. He was just 2 emperors removed from Christianity becoming the national religion of the Roman Empire, but he turned his back on it. He wasn't interested in Christianity. But what Julian took for granted was what had already in 2 generations had taken root within this Roman Empire was this Christian attitude and this Christian perspective. And Julian didn't even realize it, but within 2 generations, he was swimming in water that was so heavily influenced by Christ that his complaints about his own empire were thoroughly Christian. He was upset that Christians were doing things better than he could, and there were things that nobody cared about before Christianity became the religion of the Roman Empire. Is this making sense? So here's what he talked about. He complained to one of his pagan priests that he couldn't get the followers of that pagan religion to care for the poor in their midst. That's a very Christian idea. That before Constantine, none of the Roman emperors cared if the poor of the Roman Empire were cared for. That came from Christ. And so when Christians became this recognized national religion in Rome, that became the norm in Rome. And so 2 generations removed from that, he complained that he couldn't get pagan worshipers to care for the poor. And so what he says basically is the Christians care more not only for their poor, but for any poor they meet, whereas I cannot get a single follower of my pagan religion to care for the poor. This idea of service can change the world. If we take the position of trying to serve others, it can come to change who they are and who we are. So Josh talks about this in the book, and he says, what about today? Would pagan leaders, or non-Christians for that matter, observe the actions and behaviors of Christians and write, that group of people love, serve, and care for others without limits. For them, service isn't just about handing out turkeys once a year. They just keep showing up. I hope that we come to be known as that, as a particular congregation, as individual Christians, but also in our entire country. I hope people look at Christians and say, you know what? It doesn't really matter to them who's in control. They're going to keep being the witness to Christ that they believe and that they announce and talk about. Andy Stanley writes about this same thing. He says, our 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century brothers and sisters captured the attention of their pagan neighbors through their character, morality, work ethic, and friendship. This idea of service, of living this way of Christ, having a particular witness that when we encounter people, we want to make sure that they walk away knowing, okay, we might believe about this issue or that issue this way, but the reason for that is not arbitrary. It's not just because we're angry or afraid. It's because of who Christ is to us. I think that's key and that's important. Okay, so I've got, I don't know, 1 minute, but we can take more. I'm not in a hurry. To kind of wrap us up tonight. So what I want to ask is, I want to know, how are we doing? What are we going to do in the next couple of days and weeks? What do you think? What do you think about our witness and our response in this climate? How do we do this well? What other comments or thoughts do you have? Yeah. 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 Yeah, and I would add to that too, that in that process of getting to know someone, what I hope is the case for us is that we care more about representing Christ to them than we do about making sure that they know that we're on the right side of the political spectrum. By right, I mean correct, not. I'm trying to stay right down the center here. I don't want to upset anybody. Okay, let me give you maybe one more idea to consider tonight. Thank you. So when you're thinking about a particular issue, or you're thinking about a particular person that you might have an opportunity to have a conversation with, I think I put three things up here on the screen, just to kind of remind ourselves what we've talked about tonight. NAF cool. It's coming. It's gonna stick around, y'all. It's really, yeah. But put it through this lens. So if I'm thinking about a particular issue or a particular topic, can I let Jesus control how I view this and what I think about this, rather than insert news site here or station here? Another way to think about this, as I think about this particular issue, as I think about this conversation that I'm about to have with this person, how can I bring and make peace in this conversation as we discuss, vote on, legislate, argue, or anything else about that particular topic and issue? Is there an opportunity for me to serve because of this issue? Is there a way for me to notice the people who have needs that I can get involved and serve in this way so that I can witness to who Christ is. Is that a helpful lens again, I want to be practical, but I'm also trying to walk a tightrope here where we don't get into issues. But at some point, we've got to think about issues, right? We've got to think about what is important to us and how are we going to live that out. And so trying to live it in that way of, okay, let me put it through the lens of how can I be a non-anxious and peaceful and holy and calming and others-oriented and loving kind of person in this scenario? How can I make peace when this topic of conversation comes up? How can I serve around this particular issue? And I think in doing that, we'll have an opportunity to witness to who Christ is to us. And rather than just becoming the story that says, well, those Christians, they just hate everybody. They're filled with anger. And is that making sense? Any other comments or reactions?
Stayed in the ball game with going to the sports, we could do that with sports as well. And my team, the Longhorns, back in '05, all year long, I sweated with them and probably cursed with them, and just my wife laughed at me for driving at the TV, and then they won the national championship. And I waited and waited, and I never got a check.
Yeah.
I'm barking. I'm going after the wrong thing.
Yeah.
Jesus is for the peace. Always.
Yeah. I think that's true in so much of life is and really a lot of what I've presented to you is really not letting politics become an idol. Right? I mean, y'all are like, great, 3 weeks in, you could have just told me that one sentence and we could have been done with this whole topic in class. But yeah, don't let politics become an idol. Let Jesus be the one who's directing how we view these things and how we talk about them and how we engage other people, how we witness to them about what we believe. Yeah, okay, well, 3 weeks in, I figured out how to shorten our class, condense it. Sorry about that. Anything else?
A lot of my preached about us being countercultural. But to me, that almost makes it sound like we separate. And so even though countercultural is perfectly, it describes the situation well, there's something about the term of us being subversive that I like better.
Yeah.
Because subversive is, you're still engaged in what it is, but you're engaged in a way that's trying to bring out a different result.
Yeah.
I think we need to be a subversive.
Yeah.
In this culture.
Yeah, sometimes the temptation hits us to be totally separate, right? So in Niebuhr's designations, that's Christ above culture, where hey, Christianity, we're above all this. It's not, that's below us. That's not really a part of who we are, and that can be I think any of them can by themselves can really do us a detriment, but that one especially can do us a detriment if we're not willing to engage and be involved in. Not for the sake of getting our way, but for the sake of trying to influence people for Christ.
Okay, some people here are older than me, but I've been around for a long time. I've been here long enough to see that when all this disaster scenario is set up, when it's over with, hey, things have changed some, and life goes on.
Mm-hmm.
And we can continue to be the witnesses.
Yeah.
That we should be, no matter what. We waste a lot of time and stress. It's not worth it.
Yeah. Next Wednesday, a week from today. Well, actually, I read an article today that said that they're probably not going to call the race by that time. So whenever they call the race by, we will still have the same mission from God that we've had all the time. Regardless of who's elected at the president level, in any other elections, any levels of government, we will still have the same mission. And so we don't want to compromise our mission because we believe that a certain candidate or a certain topic or issue is more important than our mission as followers of Christ. And so we want to make sure that witness to Christ is first and foremost in our lives.